to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, October 7th, 2016. I am Dave Biddle, very happy to be joined by Brandon Castel. BCast and I are going to go over some of the high points from Urban Meyer's always interesting call-in show yesterday. We'll start with a caller who asked Coach Meyer whether this is perhaps the best defense ever at Ohio State. Here is Meyer's response. The great thing about Ohio State is all of the Buckeye fans are out of their mind. That's why you get 100,000 for the spring game. It's game 4, and we're talking about the best defense ever. Just calm down. Before we start saying how great they are, let's just go beat Indiana, end quote. I love that. I love his response there. I mean, yeah, let's just cool our jets a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, his response is first of all, it's right on. I mean, you know, I've said this for years, Ohio State fans are a little bit out of their minds. And again, any rabid, crazy college football fan base kind of is. The Alabama fan base, LSU fan base, Texas fan, you know. Ohio State kind of has a special thing going on right now with, you know, the Tressel era and then rolling right into the Urban Meyer era. You know, it's been a long time since they, you know, outside of that 1 year with Luke Fickell, it's been quite a while since this team hasn't been in the hunt for Big Ten championships and for national championships. So there's a whole nother layer that's kind of been built on top of what already existed, you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago. So, he's exactly right. They're a little bit out of their minds in a good way, you know, that it's fanaticism at its best. It's kind of the beauty of college football. And, you know, sometimes it goes a little too far in the sense of, you know, we're 4 games in. I keep saying this to kind of every question. We're 4 games in. I mean, we don't know really anything about this team. We can start to make some assumptions because they played Oklahoma early in the year, and that gave us, you know, especially on the road, that gave us a much better idea of, you know, what this team could be. But, yeah, we're way too early in the year to start talking about that. And honestly, I've loved the way this Ohio State defense has played. I think they're very sound at all levels. You know, I really like what Greg Schiano's done with that secondary, a bunch of young kids who just fly to the football, you know, are all over the place out there. But let's be realistic. They're 4 games in. They have 10 sacks. You know, they haven't exactly just been lighting up opposing quarterbacks. And they've been doing it without getting that pressure. So that kind of gives you some hope that, hey, if they can start getting some ridiculous pressure, you know, things could even get better. But I think you and I have both seen better defenses than the one we're looking at right now in terms of, you know, obviously going back to the 02 defense and, you know, some of those defenses in the mid 2000s with AJ Hawk or Malcolm Jenkins and James Laurinaitis, and, you know, even going back, you know, a couple of years ago with the defensive line they had with Joey Bosa and, you know, I mean, I think there's been a lot of great defenses at this university, and maybe at the end of this season we're talking a little different, but you know, we really have not seen what this team is capable of yet.
Coach Myers talked a lot about Mike Weber had to grow up from last year. That was the biggest thing, maybe, was maturity. And during the offseason, he pointed out on the call-in show yesterday, as you and I have talked about, that you know, he made Mike Weber, I guess it was actually Mickey Marotti. Coach Meyer can't do this. Mickey Marotti had Mike Weber work out with Pat Elflein and J.T. Barrett, I mean, the unquestioned leaders of the team during the offseason. I love this. Just speak more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that jumped out to me, you know, during the call-in show, because to me that goes back to kind of what makes Urban Meyer, you know, such a great football coach. You know, I think there's a lot of really good football coaches all around the country. There's a lot of guys who know how to call X's and O's. There's a lot of guys, you know, who eat, sleep, and breathe football. But Urban Meyer, somewhere along the way, you know, maybe it's his background and you know what he went to school for and kind of what makes him tick. But somewhere along the way, he started to figure out, you know, the human element to football and to sports that is a little bit, you know, takes it one step further than what I think a lot of coaches do, and anything from kind of their real life Wednesdays to, you know, the way they run their off-season conditioning program to the way they get guys to compete, you know, every day for everything. You know, the some of it's stuff that's been done before, but Urban just seems to kind of have a little bit different feel and understanding that kind of takes him to the next level as a football coach. And this is part of that. You know, it's not the first football coach in the history of college football to have one of his young players working out with a senior captain. But to me, you know, Mike Weber was going to be kind of one of the tremendous keys to this football team. Is you lose a kid like Zeke Elliott. You look what they had done with Carlos Hyde and with Zeke. They needed someone to emerge. They needed a running back to become that guy. And so they couldn't take the chance that Mike Weber wasn't going to get there, that, he was going to slack off in the offseason and not be one of the offseason champions. So to me, that kind of goes back to, really the brilliance of Urban Meyer in the sense of putting him with your two guys who are going to give him the best chance to really understand what it takes. And, those guys may be gone in a year or two, but what Mike Weber learned from working out with him this offseason will probably stick with him and become a part of who he is, especially now that he's tasted some of that success.
Yeah, I love that story. I also loved hearing Urban Meyer talk about Parris Campbell. He said, quote, "I'm not shy about saying Parris Campbell is one of my favorite players on the team. Why? Because he does everything well." And then BCast later on, he mentions that Campbell could be one of the best kickoff returners to ever come through Ohio State. That's a bold statement. I mean, he's been gushing about Parris Campbell since last year. Parris Campbell started the season opener last year at Virginia Tech. This kid, he still hasn't had his breakout game, but it's coming. Urban Meyer would not gush about him like he does unless Parris Campbell was the real deal. I feel like Parris Campbell's breakout game is coming and could come tomorrow.
Yeah, no question. And I agree with you 100%. I kind of said this early in the year in the preseason when we were talking through, who are the receivers we're really expecting to do something this year. And, a lot of people were throwing, some names around. This is, I think, even go back to when you had Torrance Gibson in the mix and Austin Mack had a great spring. And, there were a lot of guys that people were expecting, the Johnny Dixons and James Clarks. And, to me, I kept coming back to, okay, Noah Brown seems obvious to me because of everything we heard. And you just don't hear these guys gush like they did about Noah Brown last year if the kid doesn't have some serious talent. And then Parris Campbell was the other one, for a guy to be out there in the starting lineup last year at such a young age on a team that was expected to compete for repeating as national champs. There had to be something about Parris Campbell, and I know they've loved his athleticism. He's a kid that didn't really play the true receiver position. Obviously, was more of a hybrid running back type guy. I agree with you. I think it's coming. I think that this kid has a lot of potential. I think it's a smart decision to get him involved in the return game. He's obviously explosive. But things hearing about him as being one of their better blockers, a guy we obviously know can handle the football. There's just a lot of reasons to think at some point, I know he had a couple of drops early in his career, but at some point this kid is going to become a big part of this offense, I think. And, I think it'll be sooner rather than later.
Hey, you had mentioned something, that Urban Meyer talked about yesterday on the call-in show, just about Ed Warinner up in the booth. I think, now it's been 6 games now where they've had Ed Warinner and Tim Beck together in the booth. Results pretty damn good. Speak more about that, BCast.
Yeah, I really think if you look at one change or one thing that has had the biggest impact on this football team, I know they're playing with a different level of hunger. I know that these young guys seem to just bring that fire that, you want, that we saw, really a couple years ago on the 2014 team. They don't have a lot of the distractions that this team had a year ago with all of those guys getting ready to go pro and, coming off a championship, and you got 2 quarters. There's a lot of reasons, but to me, the number one thing is the fluidity of the offensive play calling. That really went away when Tom Herman left to go to Houston last season. And I remember, we were sitting down with Urban Meyer when he first got to Ohio State and before he had really met with anyone else in the media. And I remember him talking about the fact that it's really hard to have an offensive coordinator who's coaching the offensive line because you need that guy down on the field. You need him in the mix. You need him grabbing those offensive linemen when they come off the field. And telling them what's going on and getting in their ear and being in the middle of the mix. You can't have that guy up in the booth. And so, yeah, I just think flat out it didn't work last year with Warinner on the field and you had Tim Beck in the booth. And all of a sudden you got a guy who wasn't hired to call plays involved in the play calling. And really, I think you saw kind of how disjointed things became. So to me, obviously, when they moved Warinner to the booth and against Michigan and Notre Dame, things started to click. And I think having a whole off season of that, not that it's been perfect. They've had some struggles a little bit in the first half against Tulsa and the first quarter last week took them a little bit to get going. But clearly a huge difference with Ed Warinner in the booth and with, Coach Stud looking at, down on the field, working with the offensive line. I think it's just a much better fluid situation for the offense.
And another item that you pointed out that was interesting from the call-in show was, Urban was asked whether, a caller called in. First of all, they get about maybe 4 or 5 calls in the call-in show. You would think it'd be a lot more like that, or a lot more like 10 since it's the call-in show. But one of the actual callers that called in asked if they should shorten the wide receiver rotation to get certain guys more production, guys like Parris Campbell, Noah Brown, the top receivers on the team. Urban gave an interesting response. Talk more about that, Brandon.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting piece of the puzzle because it was good at the beginning of the year. You got all these guys and you're trying to get them in the mix, and you're as a fan or as a journalist, you're sitting back kind of mapping out, okay, who are the 4 guys, who are the 6 guys, who are the 8 guys, who's really going to be in the mix. And I think it's a good thing that they've got so many young guys who are going to be in the mix. But I think at some point, the feeling is, okay, well, we got to get these guys some numbers. Noah Brown has the big game against Oklahoma and then hasn't had as much time, hasn't had as much opportunity since then. Obviously he's been out there, but, a guy like KJ Hill, who we saw have a big touchdown early in the season, trying to get him reps into the game. How do you continue to get those guys reps, but also give the guys now that are the key performers, to get them some numbers. And, my opinion personally is that if they're good enough, if you think that a Parris Campbell is good enough to be on the field and that it's only a matter of time before they're going to get, some big time production, then you got to keep putting them out there, see what they can do, especially early in the season. Now, if we get down to, you're in the month of November, I think you better know who your guys are in the month of November. But, I think there's certain guys you can start to say, okay, is Austin Mack going to really happen this year? Probably not going to be a factor this year. I see that him as a guy in the future. But, I think when you look at, the KJ Hills and the Parris Campbells, I think you got to get both of those guys involved. And maybe that's where you start to draw the line a little bit. I mean, I'm not the one to make this decision, but I haven't seen enough from a guy like James Clark to say I've got to keep rolling him out there. Not to say that he doesn't have talent. It's just you're getting to that point where I want to go with the guys I know are going to produce. Johnny Dixon's interesting because I still think they lack that vertical deep threat. They haven't shown they haven't really gone after that vertical deep ball much. Maybe that's JT Barrett, maybe that's personnel. They don't have a guy like Devin Smith. You think maybe Johnny Dixon could be that kind of guy. Maybe Parris Campbell can be that kind of guy. KJ Hill, we saw obviously make a big play down the field, but, I think it's okay to keep rotating for a little while, but they gotta start kind of slowly narrowing it down, in my opinion, to get the guys who are going to produce.
All right, brass tacks. Let's get some Indiana predictions before we close out the show here. Buckeyes favored by 29 points. Game will kick off just after 3:30 p.m. at the Horseshoe tomorrow. I have the Buckeyes winning big in this one. I know I've said a lot of nice things about Indiana this week, but I just feel like Ohio State is a juggernaut, and they're going to win this game 52-17. What's your prediction, sir? Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because I keep coming back to the fact that I know when this team brings its best. I know I can, you kind of get that sense about a team. I know that this 2016 Ohio State team, when they bring their best and they are at their best, they basically can run away from any team in the Big Ten, at least until the end of the season. There's only probably a handful of teams in the country, the Alabamas and some of those teams that could actually play with this Ohio State team when they're playing at their best. It's still so early in the season that I don't know, are they capable of bringing their best for 12 or 13 straight games? So to me, this is the perfect test because I think Indiana can come up and bite you. Obviously, they did it with Michigan State, which I don't put them in the same conversation with this year's Michigan State team. But, so I think this Indiana team will come out and play a little better than what we think maybe. Obviously some of the Indiana teams in the last couple of years have given Ohio State some trouble. I do think Ohio State will pull away. I don't think Indiana's offense will be able to move the ball against this defense. So, I'm not quite going in the 50s. I think it'll be probably somewhere around 38 or 42, and Indiana maybe with 17, 20 points, something like that. So still a very nice win for Ohio State. But, I could be wrong. Maybe this Ohio State team is just a flat out juggernaut and they're going to just 12 games, just roll through people. But, I think Indiana will give them a little bit of a fight this week, and maybe they don't have their best stuff right out of the gate. So, I still think Ohio State pulls away though and wins pretty easily.
Great stuff as always from Brandon Castel, and congratulations to BCast's Indians and to all the Indians fans out there. You guys won Game 1 of the ALDS. See if you can close out the Red Sox here in a couple more games. But thanks again to BCast, and thanks to all the listeners for tuning into the show. Hope you have a great day. Hope you have a great Buckeye Saturday tomorrow, and we'll catch you back on Monday. Let's hear some Buckeye swag, best damn band in the land.